Hi friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Sasha and we are doing something I haven't done in quite a while here on the channel. Some of you may not know, but when I started my YouTube channel, I was trying to become a booktube channel because of my love of reading, and I thought, yeah, we'll focus on books and I'll do like a few K-pop video reactions in between. And then I posted 3 reaction videos to 2020 Mama, and they like blew up, and I was like, oh, maybe we can save booktube for another time. And also, I've been having some trouble reading over the past few years since the panini, for various reasons, but something sort of clicked in December. I don't know if it was having more time, just not having enough to do, needing to escape being in bed and feeling so ill all the time. I started picking up books again and have been absolutely devouring them. So we're going to talk about some of the things I read in January. Just a heads up and a warning, my reading tastes are changing and morphing, and not everything on this list is under 18 appropriate. I would say a lot of these reads are R ratings or above, so I will try and mention which ones I think are appropriate for younger readers and which ones are not. Please do the research on your own, check trigger warnings, check content warnings before diving into any of these titles. I am 29 years old. I know, not a lot of you know that. So I feel confident reading these books because I am older and I know what I'm getting myself into when I read them. But I'm not trying to promote them to a younger audience. That is not my goal here. I'm just trying to talk about books that I read with you guys, and not all of them are appropriate. With that being said, let's get started. The first book I read was The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the 3rd book in the From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout, which I started last year and just finished the 3rd book this month, so it's taken me some time. I really love A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, and TikTok convinced everyone that this is the next best thing if that is one of your favorite series, so I knew I had to give it a try. Going into it though, the first time, I wasn't super impressed. I have read Jennifer L. Armentrout since I was in high school, so I'm very familiar with her work, and I don't always love it. She can come off sometimes a little bit more childish and immature in her character point of views and their inner monologues, and that really drives me kind of nuts. Like, how are we going to have a character who's literally murdering people but then says like infantilizing things? It just really bothered me. This story, however, I won't talk too much about the 3rd book, I'll go over the series in general, is about a teen girl. She's 17, 18 when we pick up the story, who lives her life veiled as the maiden, and she is the chosen one for whatever reason. You sort of learn why as the story progresses, and she is sort of almost held captive by these people who have ascended and are essentially almost godlike in the way that they act and the way that they are. And she discovers a new knight who is trying to protect her, and they end up falling in love. That's not much of a spoiler, it's a romance. And then the story sort of progresses from there. This 3rd novel is, spoiler warning if you haven't read the other ones, sort of setting up to create a war between 2 different queens. It was a lot of like filler information to get to the war, so be prepared for that. But I did enjoy the story. I enjoy the chemistry. I really enjoy diving more into some of the secondary characters. Kyrian is one of my favorite people on the planet. Like, I just love him. Those kind of characters are always my favorite. Like, Cassian is my favorite in A Court of Thorns and Roses, so it's no surprise that Kyrian is one of my favorites as well. So yes, this was a great read. definitely recommend this series if you're interested. This is definitely one of the not for younger audiences. It is a more mature story, so keep that in mind. The next two books I'm going to mention are also for a more mature audience. I saw a TikTok talking about reverse harem. I had never heard of that, didn't know what that was, and thought the book sounded interesting. So the first one I read was Within Obsession and Lies. This book follows a female main character who has this mysterious power she has no control over, and it makes people obsessed with her to the point where they will kill themselves trying to get to her. So she spends most of her life completely isolated until one night she feels pulled or called to go to this bar, and there she meets three very interesting strangers. One of them is described as a sociopath or a psychopath. The other one is like a mafia boss, and the last one is like a bodyguard slash hitman. All of these men end up realizing that they are mated to her. She is their mate, and it's sort of watching them realize that, come to terms with that, while they are also doing all this secret, mischievous, devious things. They are not great people by any means. It is a dark romance. It was incredibly interesting for my first time reading a reverse harem. It was like the perfect book to start with because there's not the like jealousy you would expect, which is sort of natural, but this, the way they all bond together and like the love they feel for each other was just heartwarming. You have to get past some of the vain dialogue, I guess, where the character wears like clothing a normal woman probably wouldn't wear in everyday life. But once you get past that part and that like weird sort of not super real dialogue, I really enjoyed it. I just kept telling myself like suspend disbelief and you will have a better time with this book, and that's totally true. The next book, which is another reverse harem, was Lone Wolf by Sam Hill. This one was like cut and dry, a werewolf being mated to multiple men story. The like big plot in this is that her father was the alpha of a wolf pack. He gets murdered and she has to come back to the pack and sort of deal with that while also being hunted herself. And then all of these men sort of come into the picture and protect her in their own ways. This ends on such a cliffhanger. I was only planning on reading this first book, but the cliffhanger got me so good I had to start book 2. And I got like halfway through it before I decided I want to dive more into fantasy and out of like the reverse harem spectrum of things. So this was just like a fun, quick read. Nothing super substantial that I would be like recommending it to everyone, but good enough that I was like interested for sure. The next 3 books that I read are from one of my favorite series of all time. When I was reading this, I actually thought I was finishing the series. No, it turns out the 4th book comes out in December, which sucks. But it's Dark Shores by Dark Shores by Danielle L. Jensen. This is a series I recommend to every 18-y. This is definitely more of a young adult age appropriate series. If you are looking for something like that, this is where you would go. This first novel follows a main character who is a pirate princess as she tries very hard not to fall for the enemy soldier who has captured her and her crew and forces her to work for them. The second book follows her best friend who ends up somewhere she should not be and becomes a bodyguard to a different princess and trying to come to terms with magic and gods and goddesses and things she never knew existed. That's Dark Skies. Each book follows 2 points of view of our male and female main characters. Then book 3, Gilded Serpent, has all 4 of those characters' points of view, which was freaking incredible, but also just like nail biting because the chapter would end on such like The anxiety while reading this book, I can't even adequately explain. It was just nuts. Plus, I thought this was the end of the series, and then I was halfway through and I was like, there's no way this is the end, because we're like adding so many new plot elements and characters. It was just crazy. Loved this story, loved seeing all four of them on the page together, if not interacting together yet. But oh my gosh, completely highly recommend. It's one of my favorite series of all time. The next book I read, going back to Jennifer L. Armentrout, is A Shadow in the Ember. This, once again, is probably for more mature audiences. This is a spin-off series to the one we were talking about earlier, where instead of following the characters from today's point of view, we are going way back in time and learning about the gods and goddesses, specifically the god of death and his consort. And it's my favorite Jennifer L. Armentrout book I've ever read. It is so good. I just keep thinking about specific scenes in this book, and I already want to reread it, but I just read it this month. Like, I can't reread it yet. It is too soon, but it is my favorite. I can't stop thinking about it. I keep trying to read more things, trying to find something like this, and I haven't yet. So, my favorite book of the month, for sure. It was so good. The next series I read was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a fae or fairy series with magic, and I definitely got this because of the hype, and I'm a few years late on reading it. So when I was reading it, I already knew who our main characters were. I knew they were endgame. I just didn't know how we were going to get there. I've seen all the fan art. I've seen like specific scenes depicted because it took me so long to read this book, and I am so like embedded in the Bookstagram and Book Talk and Booktube community that I had a lot of spoilers, okay, going into this. So I was a little let down, and that's totally my own fault. So with book one, we meet our main character, Jude, who is human. She ends up in the fairy world because of very dark and gruesome circumstances with her twin sister and her older sister. They end up living with like a war general who trains his daughters, or tries to, in the acts of an art of war. And they go to school with the princes and princesses of this fairyland. They are treated horrendously. It is so bad, to the point where I was like, I don't understand. Like, I get the concept of enemies to lovers, but we're really pushing it on trying to get these two characters to be endgame somehow, because they just treat each other awful. It's terrible. I have heard criticism about this story in terms of questionable consent, and while I can see where those arguments are coming from, I don't know how I feel about it, to be quite honest. I would say going into it, if you're aware that that is there, just keep that in mind. This is definitely more of a young adult story. It would be okay for younger audiences to read. It does have a little bit steamy moments, but nothing like over the top. The world building in this and the visualization I had while reading it was top notch, like super good. The only complaint I have for this series overall is that we really jumped pretty quickly from plot point to plot point to plot point, and it didn't feel as fleshed out as it could have at some parts, and then just not getting the romance the way that everyone else did, I think, was a detriment to my reading experience. But I think if you go in pretty blind, you'll have a better time. The last two books I read in January, holy crap, I read way too much, was Neon Gods and then Electric Idol by Katie Robert. She is my new favorite author of the year so far. I'm going to try and read her backlist as soon as possible. I'm already working on some of that for my February TBR. Neon Gods was a Hades Persephone retelling, sort of set in modern day, like if the gods and goddesses existed today, how would those titles transfer to different people? They have cell phones, they have social media, they are like princes and princesses pretty much in the world at this point, where like any move they make is captured by paparazzi. Just so interesting and so cool. The first and second books, I would say, definitely for mature audiences only. The first book specifically deals pretty heavily in BDSM and sub-dom relationships and public displays. If those are things you are not comfortable reading about, check content warnings, check trigger warnings. I love Katie Robert as an author because there are times in her books where I feel like one of my personal lines will get crossed, and once that happens, I like can't read the book anymore. But as soon as we come to that line, she re-enters dialogue where they're reaffirming consent, where they're readjusting and making sure each other is safe, and that is like the absolute best thing I could ever ask for in a series like this. So I like trust her wholeheartedly. I'm going to continue to read everything she writes. She's just so good at what she does. The steam in this is 10 out of 10, over the top, incredible. And to make up for that, not to make up for it, but to add to that, the plot is just interesting and it keeps you reading. If you weren't in it for the steam, you could keep going just wondering what's going to happen next. That is it for my January wrap up. I've dived into some new things. I've gone headfirst back into fantasy, specifically romantic fantasy. I'm just enjoying it so very much. I have big plans for February. I'm a mood reader, so these plans may change, which is why I don't love doing TBRs. But I definitely want to do Katie Roberts' Wicked Villains series next. I've already started the first one. And then I want to read The Priory of the Orange Tree, because February is a short month, so I don't expect to read as much as I did this month. So if I read a longer book, that will more than make up for it in my mind. So, wow, so much. This video I know is coming out of nowhere. It kind of feels a little chaotic. I'm sorry about that, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions about any of these books, please leave a comment below. I will also leave a link to my blog post where I go into more details about age appropriateness per book and some trigger warnings per book as well if you want more in-depth analysis or if you're curious about anything on this list. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Bye!